Thank you. I was just talking to somebody. We are in deep red Naples, deep red Collier County, and look at this turnout today. I'm going to talk a lot. You're going to hear a little different language today. I'm just going to confess to you. You're going to see a different candidate today. And it's because this race is going to be about values. It's going to be about common sense. It's going to be about a new Democrat. It's going to be about change, because across the state of Florida, people are showing up in droves, not because of David Jolly, but because we are demanding change. We are demanding change. And that's what this race is about. So thank you for spending some time. I'm going to make a few remarks. We're going to do some Q&A. And I have to tell you, it is a lot easier to be a candidate for governor when people are turning out for a congressional or for a campaign than when they're not. I've had both those races. Look, I want to do a few things. As was read in my bio, I am the son of a minister, and my dad used to say from the pulpit, tell people what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you said. I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to introduce you to myself. I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of my family, but I'm also going to tell you then about the values of this campaign, which frankly, I think are the values that this country holds dear, the state holds dear, but they're values that have slipped away from us, which is why from deep red Florida to deep blue to purple and everywhere in between, people are showing up and demanding change. And then I'm going to tell you something very important, how we win this race, because we're going to win next month. A bit of an introduction to me, and I confess sometimes I get a little choked up when I talk about my family, because I'm 52 years old with a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. They just got in the car and headed north back to our home in Pinellas County. We live in a little town south of Clearwater called Bel Air Bluffs. I was born in Pinellas. I lived in Miami for 10 or 12 years during the Mariel boat lift, the 70s into the 80s, a time of remarkable transformation and intensity in the city of Miami. Very formative years for me. I lived in very deep rural Pasco County before the information age. I went from Dade County to Dade City. Yeah. And I don't know where Dade City is. It was kind of off the edge of the earth before the 80s. And then I lived in Pensacola for a while as well. But Pinellas has kind of always been home. I've worked from DC to New York, the Acela corridor, whatever you want to call it. But Pinellas County has always been home. Several of you have commented on MSNBC. I want to thank you for those who are regular viewers. Thank you. I am no longer associated with the network, obviously, but we've gotten to know each other through the network. I promise you, I'm not looking into your living rooms. There's more to me than just from here up. I promise you. For those who are not regular viewers of MSNBC, you've probably saved a lot of money on gasoline or calories or alcohol or whatever has gotten you through the past 10 years. So give money to the Collier Democratic Party or consider our campaign, and congratulations on your wise financial decisions. Look, my wife and I have a 6-year-old and 4-year-old. They are central to our lives. Every day is a Monday. You understand that when you have kids at that age. My wife and I also know that this is a moment in Florida history where we are committed to running for the governor of the state that I'm now a 5th generation Floridian. It doesn't make me a lick better than someone who moved here yesterday, but this has been a home to me. This is my identity. I've lived all over the state, but at 52 years old, I wonder if it's a state to raise our kids in. It's a state to raise our kids in. It's a lived experience. It's a lived experience, regardless of your political orientation, Democrat, Independent, or Republican. And I promise you, don't look left and right, but there are Republicans in the room right now. I promise you, there are independents in the room right now. I've been one for the last 6 years. This is a moment where we are seeing a new political coalition emerge in the state of Florida. We are, and that's what this race is about. The last thing I mentioned in terms of my personal introduction, I say this everywhere I go, and I say it for very specific reasons, so please give me grace and hold with me through this. I am a person of deep Christian faith. It is who I am. It is my orientation. I don't share that, though, to evangelize. I share that in this moment going into the 2026 cycle, because in the state that has become the home of culture wars, where faith has been used as a cudgel for public policy. I think it's time to have a governor of the state of Florida that understands their personal and private faith stops at the steps to the state house. Who I am to recognize the limitations in our constitutional government to my personal faith. It empowers my faith and it protects the Constitution. And that's the vision we need for the state and for the country at a moment where we are gripped in this state by culture wars. So look, why are we running for governor of the state of Florida? I say we a lot. It's my wife and I. My wife knew I was running for governor last year. I didn't know until this year. You all understand how that goes, right? But why are we running for governor? And look, this is a moment, an inflection moment, I think, in the state of Florida and across the country, where we know that things are slipping away from us and we need change. And it's an inflection moment where we have to make a determination as a people and as a state. Do we go in one direction or do we go in the other? I can fast forward you to the next 14 months. This election, this cycle, November 2026, is change versus more of the same. It's change versus more of the same. And so we are a state right now desperate for change because there are two great challenges that grip us. I was about a half hour north of here just about 30 minutes ago and speaking with a young woman who articulated to me why I was running for governor, and I never told her I was running. She just told me her life experience. This is a state that is gripped by an affordability crisis. Regardless of your walk of life, regardless of your region, from Pensacola to Miami, from Nocatee to Naples, from Mount Dora to Zephyr Hills and everywhere in between, the cost of housing, the cost of healthcare is getting out of reach for too many people. It doesn't matter if you're a young person trying to decide whether to commit to the economy of the state of Florida, whether you can afford to rent, whether you're going to have a job, or whether you're a retiree wondering, do I have sufficient assets to live out my retirement years in Florida? Is home insurance actually crippling my ability to stay in the home I've lived in for 20 or 30 years? There's an affordability crisis that's gripping everybody. And then we're the home of culture wars that are giving people reason to pause and wonder whether or not Florida is a place where they feel welcome, whether their grandkids or kids feel welcome, whether your Canadian friends want to visit. We are gripped by culture wars, and what my Republican friends really have never realized is culture wars have victims. Culture wars have victims. Maybe many of us in this room have not felt that as personally as others have. But I promise you, when your right to your franchise are suffered, your ability to access the ballot becomes restricted. You feel that impact. When based on who you love or who you worship, changes your direction in the state of Florida, or what you feel as a personal dignity or respect or lot in life. When you're a victim of that, you do question whether Florida's home. And here's the important thing. I mentioned our 6-year-old and our 4-year-old kid. We're a family of deep Christian faith. Born in a community where a child born 5 miles north to me has less opportunities than my kid. Surrounded by a very safe environment, culturally, religiously. But I don't know at 4 and 6 years old who my children are going to choose to love or who to worship, where their life will take them. But I know in the state of Florida, I either have to protect them from where life takes them, or they'll just naturally flow along in the state of Florida in a place where certain cultures, certain environments, certain love, and certain faith are worshipped or protected in ways that others aren't. We're a state gripped by an affordability crisis, gripped by culture wars. And there's a reason that while retirees still flock to Florida, young people are leaving. Young people are leaving. The Republican-friendly Florida Chamber of Commerce has said it has become a statistical trend, and it is a worrying economic trend that young people are trying to leave the state, not come to the state. And so, yes, for my wife and I, we wonder if raising our kids in Florida is the right decision, economically, but also a matter of culture. But I'm not the only one. I've been a Democrat for 4 months, folks. Thank you for the welcome. But I knew all of this before I was a Democrat. But in today's Florida Democratic Party, I found a home that espouses the values that frankly, I tried to exercise as a Republican when I was in Congress. I tried to exercise as a Democrat fighting for electoral reform, campaign finance reform, democracy reform, but values that I see in today's Democratic Party, the values that I think our politics hold. So if I've introduced you to myself, I also want to tell you about the values of this campaign, the values I hope to emanate as a candidate, but frankly, to build a coalition around that by next summer becomes so much bigger than just a candidate and the race for governor, becomes a coalition of values and ideals that represent who we are as a state, who we can be, and why we accomplish change. So let's talk about those values. 3 very quick values, and then we're going to talk about how policy emanates from them. The 3 values that I have in this campaign that I've held in politics, and I think we all hold together regardless of the voter registration that might be written on your card. First, the economy should work for everybody. Everybody. The economy should work for everybody. Now listen, I will say this very constructively as Democrats, we should not condemn success. We shouldn't. We should congratulate success. We should welcome success. But it is okay to expect that those who have been successful participate in our economy in a way that maybe the least successful do. That's okay. Congratulate success. But we should also recognize that the economy is not working for everybody. Not working for everybody. In some cases, that is the lowest wage earner. In some cases, that is the new entrant to our economy. But in some cases, it's the retiree who spent 40 years working, giving everything they had, but today can't afford their homeowner's insurance, or today can't afford their utility bills, or today can't afford to stay in their home or afford rent, and are considering moving back with family or children in Kentucky or somewhere else. The economy is not working for everybody in the state of Florida. It's just not. We don't get to wish that away. It's not. It's not. Our economy is fracturing and stressing and cracking, and too many people are considering leaving the state because it's not working. Now look, we're not the Fed. We don't control interest rates. There are other macroeconomic conditions we don't direct, but there are real policy changes that we can make that will represent an economy for everybody. We're going to talk about those policies. The first value is the economy should work for everyone. The second value is the government actually has a responsibility in our lives. At a time when DOGE has it under attack, when we are cutting revenue, we are attacking services, we are making government the boogeyman, the government has a role in our lives. It's our government, we pay for it, it should be lean and it should be efficient, and where we can cut costs, we should. But the government has a responsibility to provide services for our seniors, for our veterans, for families in need of healthcare for their kids, for families in need of excellence in public education.
Yes.
The government has a role to provide services. Perhaps the preeminent role of government is to provide for public safety, to fight crime. We have a responsibility to ensure that the government that we pay for is efficient and lean, but provides services for our communities. The third value is very simple, and it's heartbreaking that we're in a place in Florida and American history where this is controversial. It should not be, and I say this as the son of a Southern Baptist preacher who grew up in the 70s in the South. You can imagine how conservative that environment was. But we must be a state, we must be a country, and I believe I found a home in the Democratic Party who knows that everybody should be welcome and empowered regardless of the color of your skin, where you were born, who you are, or who you work with. Values. That's a value. That's not a political position. That's not a political position. To say that everybody deserves dignity and constitutional protections is not a right versus left, it's a right versus wrong. It's a value. It's a value. The economy should work for everybody. The government has a responsibility in our lives with what Bob Graham and Lawton Childs refer to the basic responsibilities, the responsible administration of government. And the third value is in a state of culture war for the past 6 to 8 years. It is not an attack on meritocracy to lift everybody up. It's an improvement of meritocracy to do that. We should welcome everybody, and it is okay to embrace diversity in this state. So look very quickly on what does that mean for policies. Because I could put you to sleep for the next 2 hours. I promise not to. I promise not to. And if I try to, somebody cut me off. But there are real policy areas in the state of Florida where some of these issues can be resolved. Look, when we talk about an economy that works for everybody, certainly that means for the lowest wage earner. But let's start with the homeowner. Let's start in this part of the state. A part of the state that has been wrecked by natural disasters, hurricanes, and other challenges. The homeowners insurance market in the state of Florida is collapsing and it's not coming back. It's not. It's just not. I promise you it's not. It's being held together by Band-Aids and popsicle sticks, and the rates are 2 or 3 times more than they were 10 years ago. Denial rates are at 50%. CEOs are making $25 million. We don't tax insurance profits to try to keep undercapitalized firms here. None of the largest underwriters in the country or the world will come here because, and this is where Florida can lead the way, the cost of private homeowners insurance in natural disaster states is unaffordable. It is a risk not worth taking because we've denied climate science and climate change for too long. So in Florida with hurricanes, in Texas with hurricanes and floods, in California with wildfires, in Tornado Alley through the Midwest, we simply do not have an affordable way to cover natural disaster risk. You could say we have a market-based way, that's true, but where public policy meets the economy is to recognize that a private insurance market for homeowners insurance is out of reach for too many people. I think we need a state catastrophic fund that finally removes hurricane and natural disaster coverage from the private market and puts it into a fully funded catastrophic fund run by the state. It will cut private property homeowners insurance by 60 to 70%. It will. If you go to traditional perils, a tree falling on your roof, a pipe bursting, a slip and fall, go to your agent, ask them, it's called X-Wind. If you were to price your X-Wind policy, what would it cost? I don't know everybody's policy, but I know ours would drop by 60 to 70%. And I understand most people would as well. Now look, one of the things I like about being a Democrat is we accept math. And data and science and public health and vaccines and everything else that contributes to human progress. Fund to cap fund, I'm not going to hide the ball on that. We won't talk about revenue too long and really put people to sleep, but we have tourist development tax dollars coming to the state every year that we spend on building more convention centers and advertising more tourism. Somebody wants to cut off tourism. I'm not going to be a governor that hurts it. I'm going to be a governor that helps it. I represented the beaches of Pinellas County. I understand how tourism, agriculture, and construction contribute to our economy. But folks, we don't have a crisis of convention centers in the state of Florida. We do have a crisis of insurance, homeowners insurance, and we have a crisis of public education that we're going to talk about. But listen, we have a way to fund a cap fund and to do it responsibly and to cut insurance. My Republican friends call my plan socialism. I just call it cheaper insurance. Look, we need property tax relief, generational property tax relief. The affordability crisis is driven by access to housing right now for homeowners and renters. And we can create all of these programs that actually pass through to renters. We can put them on industrial, commercial properties. But right now, when Tallahassee Republicans, led by our governor, are considering repealing all property taxes, I think we heard a boo here. Yeah. I'll accept the boo on the governor, but let me ask for patience on booing their tax plan. Because we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it. They're talking about repealing property taxes, which means defunding police, defunding schools, defunding transportation, defunding clean air, defunding clean water. There's a lot that they could drive this economy off the edge of the cliff if they go where they're going. But I mean this. Let's see what they put forward. There's no reason for us to set our hair on fire or something they haven't proposed. Truly, I think voters get disenchanted by that. Let's see what they put forward. If it makes sense, let's work with them on it. And if it doesn't, then let's present values that create a contrast. How do we responsibly provide for services in our government while ensuring we're trying to accomplish property tax relief? I do think we need first-time home buyer relief in the state of Florida, tax relief. Many of us benefit from Save Our Homes and portability because 20 years ago, we had a very similar crisis. Kind of eerie how history repeats itself. Property taxes and insurance right now are costing families more than the note on their mortgage. That happened 20 years ago. Longtime homeowners, though, couldn't stay in their homes because property valuations in the 2000s started tripling. So we passed Save Our Homes and affordability. It made sense. It's good public policy. Let's keep it. Let's keep it. But we now have the inverted problem. First-time home buyers buying a property from a 20-year homesteader, their property taxes go up by 200, 300, 400%. Their insurance includes natural disaster risk, and the cost of insurance and taxes is greater than their note. Young people today, the young woman I just spent a half hour with north of here, has no expectation that she'll ever own a home. Now, maybe that's okay for her. Maybe that's her lot in life, but she certainly spoke like she wanted to own a home at some point. She spoke of the dream quality that Florida once had. She was an immigrant from Cuba. Knowing that at maybe 23, 25 years old, I'm not sure, she may never own a home in the state that she considers having a dream quality. There are policy changes. We're not the Fed, but there are policy changes our Republican colleagues will not embrace that I think could directly address the affordability crisis and access to housing for Florida's residents. We can reduce the cost of utilities in the state of Florida by recognizing once and for all that climate science is real and should be a part of Florida's public policy. That if we bring in clean and renewable and new energies into our utility environment, not only do we provide for stewardship of the environment, but we reduce utility rates for every ratepayer across the state. Frankly, with car insurance, one of the great drivers for young people in the state of Florida in terms of affordability, we can move some of the natural disaster risks from the car insurance industry into a state catastrophic fund. We could invest in more public and multimodal and mass transit. I realize that's not a big issue for Naples, but in Miami and Orlando and Jacksonville and other communities, workforce, whether it's young or old or anywhere in between, transportation costs are a real cost. And right now, instead of investing in transportation for the future, we're investing in toll roads. To say if you can afford $10 to get to work, you get there more quickly. If not, you have to sit through that pain for an hour before you get to your employer. Just because of decisions, policy decisions from my friends on the other side of the aisle. There are policy changes that can make Florida more affordable in this environment. Very respectfully, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are simply ideologically incapable of embracing these solutions because it requires government to actually provide a solution. This gets very esoteric and I won't belabor it, but I think in the next 10 to 20 years in the state of Florida, we're going to face a hard conversation about what does our economy look like? Because we're quickly racing to where California is in terms of creating a state that's unaffordable. So what does it mean to invest in the workforce? What does it mean to invest in housing? What does it mean to invest in providing healthcare? Because I don't want a Florida in 10 or 20 years that's only the home to the rich and the reckless. I want a Florida that's a home for everybody. I remember, I don't know the exact age, was I 5, 6, 7 years old in Miami, but I remember that moment where I realized I can see myself as a young child thinking, wow, everybody I meet that visits Florida, it is the biggest moment in their life to visit Florida. There's a dream quality to it. And I remember feeling a little special when I was born here, that Florida was my home. I don't know that on the current trajectory that that's the case for people. It's not the case for young people. We know they're leaving. So look, the economy should work for everybody. A couple of areas where I'm going to talk about that second value where the government has a role and responsibility in our lives. We are cruising towards a generational crisis and a national conversation about public education in the state of Florida and public education nationally. We need a 10-year renaissance in public education in the state of Florida. We do. After 20 years of public education being under attack, and I'm gonna take us to school a little bit on this because I'm looking around the room and I'm not guessing there's a lot of elementary kids in your home, but they're grandkids and there are families that you love and care about. And I want to introduce you to a few things that I didn't know about. I didn't know about until our kids started to enter education in the state of Florida. Right? We each come from different lived experiences. I speak of mine. Yours is a little different. We have sold choice to Florida's families through the lens of freedom, because freedom is a very powerful drug. It really is. And 25 years ago, what Jeb Bush said was right for many families. Your child, your family is being left behind in a public school that's failing. Now, what Jeb and Republicans said is, while we tinker around and try to fix public education, we're going to let you go wherever you want to go. We're 20 years past that. Now we have universal vouchers that's diverting money into private schools and choice schools, voucher schools and charter schools. But I'm going to introduce you to the crisis that is brewing and is real. First of all, we are starving public education today in the state of Florida. Our teachers are paid 50th in the nation, and it is a moral one. It is moral wrong that our teachers are paid 50th in the nation. It is. It's not a political statement. I don't care what your voter registration is. We're the third largest state in the country. We're here in Naples and Collier County. It is a moral wrong that our teachers, our public school teachers, are paid last in the nation. Why? Because they've been neglected and overlooked and underappreciated. It is a recruitment issue. It is a retention issue. It is a dignity issue, but it is leaving children behind. But still today in that environment, I promise you, and you're going to understand this when we talk about this over the next few minutes, still today, I promise you the greatest access to academic excellence, to the trades and to the arts sits in our public schools, not in our choice schools. Here is why, if you haven't been introduced to this, please understand this. Under today's Florida law, in our choice schools, which are incredibly popular, Florida's families are just waking up over the last 24 months to realize that our choice schools are now leaving kids behind. What Jeb argued 20 years ago now applies directly to our choice school environment, and here's why. If your first grade kid can't read in a choice school, the school gets to kick them out. They get to kick them out. They don't have to teach them to read. They don't have to provide what's called an IEP, an individualized education program. They don't have to do it. They can kick them out by March. They take what's called the FTE, the funding from the voucher. The kid can't read, they get to kick them out by March. This is a lived experience. Family friends of ours, their first grade kid can't read. The school was gracious enough to give them a second shot. But that kid gets kicked out if they can't read because the school doesn't want the additional expense of making sure that kid can read. If your child's on the spectrum or has a disability, they don't have to accept that kid and they don't have to provide services. If your child wants to pursue academic excellence by taking trigonometry in 10th grade or pursue the arts or the trades, they don't have to do any of that. None of that. None of that. Now listen, this is where I sound a little different than past Democrats, and I'm going to ask us to work together to move the state conversation in a new direction. Because at times I'm an analyst and at times I'm a candidate. John Heilman has told me stop being an analyst and start being a candidate. But I'm offering a little bit of analyst insight and advice. Republicans won the war on school choice by selling freedom. We need to have a conversation with the state that your kids and your grandkids are getting left behind by today's choice program. As a lot of public school administrators will tell you, choice is here to stay. It's incredibly popular. We may be a cycle too early, or this might be the right cycle, but we're heading to this over the next 5 to 10 years in Florida. The next conversation is that your kids are getting left behind. So what do we do about it? I think we need a 10-year renaissance in funding for public education. Yes. Public education. Okay. 30% more, not 3% more, 30% more. Now listen, if a politician could do things on day one, the Ukraine war would be over. But we can commit on day one. What does that look like? We'll figure it out. Is it a 10% pay raise in year one, 10% in year two, 10% in year three? But we need dramatic investment in our public education infrastructure. In some counties, it is fantastic. In some schools, it's fantastic. But in other schools, it's not. It's an 80-year property with leaky air conditions and portables or trailers, with a playground that's a dusty field beneath an oak tree. And yet, down the road, the voucher school has small classrooms, ballistic glass, a security officer, air conditions, whatever it is. We're funding environments with our voucher schools. We're not funding education. So let's start by creating a marketplace in public education that Florida's families want to rush into. Let's stand up for public education and recognize the excellence in public education. But then we turn to our voucher schools and say, we're not going to crush the voucher program. We're not going to crush the choice program. But if you are going to receive state money, you're going to provide the same standards and services and academic. We'll see an attrition of 80 or 90% of our choice schools in that environment. God bless you. If you wish to keep being an education partner, keep going at it, keep doing it, but you're not going to do it with state money. But if you're going to be an education partner for Florida's families receiving state money, you're going to provide the same services and standards that our public education environment does. It's a little different way of talking about choice. But listen, Jeb's argument 25 years ago is now our argument. Republicans' school choice policy is leaving your kids behind. And we're not fighting against choice, but we're fighting for your kids, and we're fighting for your grandkids, and we're fighting for Florida's families. There's an area where I want to talk a little bit about where government has a role in our lives, because this is also a bit of a different conversation among Democrats. Part analyst, part candidate, but I'm going to tell you where I am as a candidate, and then hopefully you'll see why the analyst role matters here too. We should be a party, and I will be a Democratic governor that's tough on crime. We should be tough on crime. We've fallen into a trap arguing with Republicans about crime. And we're seen as not being tough on crime, and we need to fix that. We should fix that. We should be a state that's tough on crime. And here's the problem and the opportunity. Republicans for a decade now have gotten away with a moral wrong. They've gotten away with conflating immigration and crime. And so if you're a Republican follower or a viewer, you think of crime and you think of immigration, and it's wrong. Statistically, there is a higher rate of violent and property crime within native-born American communities than there are in our neighboring communities. That's data, that's science, that's real. But if you listen to our Republican friends, they want to convince you that the greatest threat any of us face is the father who spent the last 15 years driving down the road to be on time for work, to spend 10 hours working, to earn a living, to put food on the table for his child so that his second-generation child can actually attain the American dream. That they can read to them at night, put them to bed, and show up the next day for work. That's not a criminal, that's a valuable member of our society. We should have strong border security. I think we should have tall walls but wide gates. We should. But we're the party that can recognize that the father who's putting food on the table for the past 15 years without a speeding ticket is not the person we need to be sending ICE after and the Florida law. One of the things we need to do, look, when I was a Republican Congress, I introduced something that I couldn't even get to Congress 10 years ago to agree to, but now has been signed into law by this president. I called it the Thin Blue Line Act. It stood up for law enforcement. It said if you assault a law enforcement officer, you could face enhanced penalties. The law at the time said if you assault a youth, an elderly person or a member of the disability community, you you could face enhanced penalties. My legislation added law enforcement officers to that because I think we've seen too much assault on our law enforcement officers. We should be the party that's tough on crime and stay up to the enemy. We need to recognize that working with law enforcement means we don't dictate criminal justice from Tallahassee. We provide resources to local communities where local law enforcement understands how to create safe communities. In some places, that's sex crimes. In some places, that's drugs. In some places, that's gangs or it's guns. And in some places, it's immigration. But trust local law enforcement to know how to keep a community safe. And in some places, that's investing in youth programs to keep people out of a life of crime. In some places, that ensures that our local district attorneys and other prosecutors understand that there is a disparate impact on communities of color when it comes to our criminal justice system. But we can be the party that's tough on crime. So what does that mean as a Democratic governor? It's very simple. It means that you were born here, if you immigrated here from Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, or if you're a Tallahassee politician who steals $10 million from the Medicaid program, your own colleagues say a crime was likely committed and who is now the subject of a grand jury. Yes, if you break the law in Florida under a Democratic governor, we're going to hold you accountable. I'm going to say, look, we're on day 4 of a 4-day swing, and I know I'm going a little long, but I'm going to talk about something that every consultant in Florida politics will tell you not to talk about. I don't care because I'm getting my sea legs in this race right about now. We're going to talk about guns and gun violence in this race. Talk about it because this is another place where we have to move the conversation into common sense and get away from the left, right, Second Amendment stuff. Look, nobody in this race, and this includes me, is going to try to take a firearm or a gun from a law-abiding citizen of the state of Florida. I make that pledge to you right now. That is a pledge I make in this race. Nothing I will do will try to take a firearm from a law-abiding citizen. That is my absolute pledge. You won't see me on the internet making that pledge because my opponents want to only run the reel that comes after this, which is we're going to talk about saving children's lives in the state of Florida. We're going to stop the next school shooting. We're going to stop about talking about the next gun violence incident in our synagogues and in Walmarts and at the high school football game on Friday night, because that is the greatest responsibility we have to do. We're not going to take guns, but our gun safety legislation in the state of Florida and across the country is weak and inefficient, and it's not working and it's not saving lives. So let's go do it together and figure it out. I'm going to give you a couple things to think about. We need comprehensive and universal background checks in the state of Florida. Criminal conviction check in the state of Florida and across the country. What does that mean? I'm going to give you something that may be just a little graphic, but I think we're okay in this room, and I'll watch my words. A case of domestic violence in a home. We'll use roles: a husband beating his wife. The cops are called. The wife won't provide a victim statement for reasons that certainly could be understood. No charges are pressed, or the prosecutor decides there's not ample evidence for the case. The cops leave. The second time that happens, same thing. Third time, same thing. Fourth time, same thing. The fifth time, that husband goes down to Walmart, buys a gun, and the background check does not know that law enforcement has responded to that home because of domestic violence, sells them the gun on demand, and they go home and they kill their wife. I'm not trying to take a firearm from a responsible gun-owning citizen in the state of Florida. I'm trying to take it from the wife-beating murderer. And it is okay. When I flew to Florida in an elementary school, the carpets in their classrooms, let's say they're blue or gray, and there's in every classroom a section that has a different color carpet. Red carpet, I believe. Because kids are trained from the first day of school that when there's a shooting, you run to the red carpet because it keeps you out of the line of fire from the windows and doors. We don't need red carpets in classrooms. We need gun safety legislation. Licensing and registration and insurance and put those questions in front of Florida's voters. Because whatever we can do to save the next kid's life, we should do. Whether we're in politics or not, when we leave this earth, if the question is, did we save the next shooting? Did we save the next kid's life? Yes, I want to be able to say yes. And maybe we need to do something that Mayor Pete's really good at and turn the question on Republicans and say, what are you willing to do to prevent the next school shooting? Because for the last 20 years I've been in politics, I haven't heard a single thing. In fact, after Republicans passed the Parkland reforms, my current opponent in this race, your hometown congressman, is trying to roll them back and do away with this. That is wrong. Whatever you do on gun violence and gun safety legislation, we should be moving towards less gun violence, to more gun safety legislation, not backwards. That's a policy difference. It's a policy difference. So look, the last value, and I'm going to tell you how we went, and we'll go to Q&A. The last value is this: we should be a state where everyone is welcome and celebrated and lived. That simply means, in some very specific ways, we provide a different voice of leadership for this state. Tourism is down not because of the $2 tax on rental cars or $5 on a hotel night. Tourism is down and slowing because people feel unwelcome in the state of Florida, and they're afraid of a state that might be an open carry state. Well, I would like to be the governor that in January 27 stands up and says to the world, in the state that launched culture wars nationally and internationally, we apologize for that and we welcome everybody back to the state of Florida. Leadership. But the other thing means, instead of putting culture warriors and ideologues into places of leadership in the state, how about we return to subject matter experts who understand how to run our state universities? We understand that clean air and clean water actually improves the Public Service Commission and our utilities, who understand that where voters of color and communities of color have seen reduced access to the ballot box, we should increase that. To understand that improving diversity in the state is not an attack on meritocracy, it actually strengthens our meritocracy. Look, I bring to politics my lived experience. Each one of you bring your lived experience. But all of our lived experiences are different. One of the things I'm doing with the economic development team that we're building out is I'm looking at Black county commissioners across the state of Florida to help me lead economic development in the state of Florida. County commissioners are duly elected. Their qualifications are uncompromisable. They understand building an economy around tourism and ag and construction, but they understand that there are communities left behind. It is okay for me to strengthen this campaign and this race and to strengthen the state by recognizing that people with different lived experiences from different communities might know best how to strengthen the overall Florida economy, because too many of us, if I'm just looking at it by myself, will miss stuff. We'll miss stuff. That's not a weakness. That's a strength. That's a strength. And yes, when it comes to the culture wars that have marginalized too many people, particularly our allies and friends in the LGBTQ+ community, it is okay to say teachers should be able to teach, the book should be able to come back. And that everyone pay tribute to someone or a community by murals in the streets. I used to belong to a party that believed in local control and home rule. I didn't do it. God bless them. Through voices of leadership, but also through policy and appointments into an administration, I want to make sure we have a state leadership that looks like our state. That's a strength. But I'll also tell you, we owe it to our youth to do this. We do. I'm going to ask you to think about this. Whatever your predisposition on the issues of DEI, has got their clocks cleaned a little bit on this. Maybe we need to talk about it a little differently. I want to ask you to think about the youth today. You can't be what you can't see. You can't be what you can't see. If you're a young person of color who can't look up and see a person of color on the Supreme Court or in leadership, you can't be what you can't see. And you don't see somebody who looks like you in leadership, you can't be what you can't see. We're not ripping away meritocracy. It's just an additional goal. It's an attainment, and it strengthens who we are. It strengthens who we are as a state government. It strengthens our meritocracy, but it also gives to the youth who are going to follow us one way or another when we've left this earth. We should retreat from trying to create a state government, a state leadership that looks like our state. We should embrace it. So how do we win? How do we win? How do we win? Look, I want to point something out here. You may not have realized in the last 20 or 30 minutes. I didn't put you to sleep, thank you. Not once have I mentioned the President of the United States. Yeah, and it's interesting what I hear back on this. The majority of people say thank you, others are like, wait a minute, we're going to the No Kings March. God bless you, go to the No Kings March. Your convictions on the president. I have done it when in 2015, when he called for the Muslim ban in December of 2015, I became the only Republican in that cycle who went to the floor of the House and called on the president to drop out of the race. And I gave my Christian testimony from the House floor. I was speaking to Republican-leaning faith members of the faith community. And I said, and I'm going to say it here today, I said, look, I believe in the saving grace of the Jesus Christ that I call my God. I did that on the House floor. And I said, the beautiful thing about this is I can say it in front of my colleagues in the Congress and the country without fear of reprisal. But if this president has his way, we may not be able to identify or speak about our faith. It was an assault to the constitutional protections that I thought were preeminent in this country. I have made my values and my position on this president clear. I spent 8 years in many of your living rooms talking about it. But this race is about the responsible administration and the future of the state of Florida, how we educate our kids, how we provide for transportation, how we reduce insurance costs, how we reduce taxes, how we fight crime but not communities. This is a race that allows an Andy Beshear to get elected in Kentucky, a race that allows Steve Bullock to get elected in Montana, and a race that allows David Jolly to get elected in the state of Florida. Whatever your predisposition is on the president, and I promise you, don't look like left or right. Some people here are going to vote for the president. That's okay. But if you're going to No Kings, or you're calling a member of Congress, or you're participating in a rally, just do it in a separate email when you're talking about the governor's race. Because I want my kids to have a different Florida. I want my kids to have a different Florida. This is a moment of remarkable change. Our politics are dramatically divided nationally and in the state of Florida. We feel it, we feel it, we feel it, we know it. Many of you in this room, now you're going to look left and right when I say it, have Googled Portugal. If you're not laughing, it's because the people next to you have considered leaving the country. I'm not going to be a politician to tell you that this entire race is about our kids. That just feels transactional and feels icky, and I'm not going to try to sell that to you. But I know that this race is about changing the opportunities in the future for our kids in the state of Florida. Whether or not we want them to grow up in Florida or Portugal, yes, that's on the line. That's on the line in this race. It is. And so we got to be smart. We got to win. Why did I spend all this time talking about values? For this reason. For this reason. Those values, an economy that should work for everyone, a government that serves its people and is responsible to its people, and a place where everyone's welcome. I think as Democrats, that is actually what unites us. From the youngest, most progressive, call him a socialist Democrat, whatever it is, to the last blue dog standing and a guy named Rod Smith somewhere in the central part of the state, some of you may have voted for. But within our party, from the progressive to the moderate to the blue dog, those values are what we're all fighting for. The economy should work for everyone. The government has a role in our lives, and yes, everybody should be lifted up and empowered. But those values are so much bigger than our party. Those values allow us to build a coalition bigger than our party, to actually allow independents and Republican voters at a moment of change, dramatic national change, where Democrats are winning races or outperforming by 15 or 16 points. This cycle, our congressional special elections, our state legislative races, Democrats are outperforming by 15 to 20 points because people are desperate. But if we stick on these values we can talk about with the faith community, the values that we believe represent the basic teachings of faith, all faiths, love, joy, dignity, respect, empowerment, whatever those faith teachings are. Frankly, the friends I built an affinity with who identify as agnostics or atheists, who on most days are more charitable than people who sit on church pews on Sunday mornings. These are the values that Thomas Jefferson called the natural rights of man. These are the values that allow us to unite as Democrats, but to build a coalition far much larger than our own party. That's how we win this race. I mentioned our children at the start of this race. They're headed back home. Many of you will understand what I'm about to say through life experience. Our 6-year-old and our 4-year-old are wildly different. Chris Wills on our campaign. I'm going to tell a bunch of you at the end of this event to talk to Chris. He experienced that last night. He said, I finally get what you're talking about. Because our 6-year-old daughter, Caroline Claire, we call her Cece, she's going to be just fine in life. We're going to set up the guardrails. She's going to ping pong off of that. Oh, she's gone and not looking back. Our 4-year-old son Teddy's already told mom he's never leaving the house. And I believe, our 6-year-old Carolina, we were reading to her one night. I was reading to her in bed. And she started crying and she said, Dad, I don't want you to run for governor. She said it today again, as I was saying goodbye to her as she was gone. And when she said it, look, it's abrupt, right? I mean, if anybody in your life can change your thinking, can change your decisions, it's a child. Or that's your kid, your grandkid, the kid next door, whatever it might be, the kid in your life. And two things happened in that moment, and it took me a while to unpack it. The first thing was I realized in real time what an indictment it was of where we are as a country and as a state. A 6-year-old child. I remember being 6. My father was a Jimmy Carter Democrat, but a minister who couldn't talk about it, but I knew. I knew. But we looked up aspirationally to politics. Whether it was Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan in my year, there was an aspirational quality to it. Our 6-year-old daughter sees politics as vile and vicious and mean and ugly and something she doesn't want anything to do with, and she doesn't want her father. That's an indictment of who we are. And what I want to believe, but this is part of the conversation we now have over the next 16 months in this country and in this state and in this race. What I want to believe that a single election can actually help heal this moment. Now, I think that verdict's still out. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that verdict's still out. Are we as a people ready for change? Are we ready to say at some point we have to rise above our politics, our partisan reflex, and recognize that maybe there's a set of values that we can all congregate around, regardless of your party registration? You don't have to be a Democrat to vote for a Democratic governor. You can be a Republican or an independent, and you're going to have a seat at the table. Is this a moment where we can do that? The first thing I realized in my daughter's words were the raw indictment, the searing indictment. But the second thing I realized, and I attribute this frankly to Providence because of my faith, the words that came to me that I shared with her then, and I shared with her today, I share with her a lot. I said, sweetie, if you have a chance to change the world, you take it. You take it. You don't know how it turns out. I don't know if I'm going to be the next governor of the state. I promise you, my wife and I would not have gotten into this race if I did not believe that there is an opportunity this cycle to win. I know that's the case. But what I was telling my daughter is in this moment, when you have a chance to change the world, you take it. You take it. Now, here's the most important thing I want you to understand. This race is not about David Jolly being a candidate for governor. It is not. Candidates don't win races. People choose a new direction. People choose a new direction. And so in this moment, what I was telling my daughter is what I'm going to ask of you, which is in this moment, we all have to do what's within reach to change the world. So for my wife and I, it was the personal decision that we believe in this moment, I can run for governor and we have a chance to change the direction of the state. For others, it's just committing to vote because life is too challenging. Kids, healthcare, job, whatever it might be. Your commitment, what's within reach, is actually pledging to vote. For others, it is registering someone to vote. For some, it is making sure your voter registration is active or your vote by mail registration has not been done away with. For others, it is coming to an event like this, participating in a community conversation, whether you're a Republican, an independent, or a Democrat. For others, it's giving $5 or $10 to do what's within reach. And we are seeing what is happening this cycle. When people do what's within reach, this new coalition led by Democrats is outperforming by 15 or 20 points. The way we win the Florida governorship is all of us together do what's within reach. Not that David Jolly performed strongly as a candidate. Yes, I believe we are building a campaign to win the governorship. And where I fall short, where I'm insufficient, make me stronger. Advise me, be a part of this team. Don't criticize. Lift me up, refine me. I will do my part, but I'm asking you to do your part as well. Because what happens, I promise you this is going to happen. Next November, when Florida's voters elect a Democratic governor, not when David Jolly wins the race, when Florida's voters elect a Democratic governor in the home of MAGA, the home of Donald Trump, the home where our governor has had the greatest grip on Republican politics we've seen in decades. When Florida's voters vote for change, when Florida voters do that, the biggest story next November across the country and across the world will be that the Democratic Party in Florida created and led a new coalition built around values that the economy should work for everyone. The government has a role in our lives and everybody is welcome. And then that coalition was bigger than the party and brought in independents and Republicans. That is a political coalition we have not seen in decades in this country. You look to yourself, and I get to say to my daughter, sweetheart, we just changed the world.
I think we have some tough questions. And the rest of y'all pull the back on, you have no idea what's coming. But I know you would probably like a glass of water and some hydration, so. I'm gonna start things off with a question that he also doesn't know is coming. But it actually, I'm gonna try to do it against the backdrop of what we just heard. And I saw a gentleman here earlier today that had a shirt on that says, I read banned books. I think one of the biggest crises that we're waging in this country is the war against hypocrisy. And it's, do as I say, not as I do type of thing. I heard that as a child. But one of the things that we can do to increase the end of hypocrisy is in fact education. And you talk about education a lot, and it's important. How do you, reverse HB 1069, which banned books that many of us read, The Great Gatsby, banned. For whom the bell tolls, banned. 3 Hemingway books, banned. 16 Stephen King books, banned. Those I'm okay with because those care to help. But how do you improve the educational process when power is who's controlling the information, where most people are getting their news, and how do you circle that somewhere?
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, I think in an age of disinformation, one of the things, we gotta do a lot right now. Like, the challenges in front of us are real. I'm a Pollyanna, I'm an optimist, but I'm not naive. We got a lot going against us. And I say that because, look, I visited with leaders of the Hillsborough County School Board who were afraid Governor DeSantis was going to remove them, depending on how they voted on a certain book. And that allowed me to learn the process. In Hillsborough County, many other counties, there are 3 stages of review handled by academics and teachers and people who understand whether a book contributes to the enrichment of an individual or not. That process works great. We don't need the governor of the state to come in and say Hillsborough County's process is wrong. And I'm also gonna tell you something else. I know this sounds a little crazy in politics. The governor's not the smartest person in the state. But that's true of this governor, and it's true of the next governor, whomever is elected. The governor's not. What I get excited about is surrounding myself with people who are smarter than I am. To surround myself by subject matter experts, to be able to show the state what adult leadership could look like in this state. And so, yes, that includes it includes curriculum development. I don't know the best curriculum development. I do know in public libraries, let the access reign, bring back the books, bring back access. In our education environments, the teachers and the administrators who have been trained and understand this, how to balance what is age appropriate with providing academic enrichment. Trust them. I'm not a teacher. I taught 1 semester as an adjunct to the university in the state of Florida, and I won't say it because I don't want to get him in trouble. It was terrible at it. Trust the people who are educated in this environment. Bring back the books, take the handcuffs off the teachers. And the last thing I'll say about this is one of the ways we make an immediate impact is by actually appointing to places of leadership, people who understand subject matter expertise. What can you do when you get elected on day 1? You got a Republican legislature. Guess what? We get to set about replacing all of Ron DeSantis' appointees. We appoint a new commissioner of education in the state of Florida. And we also appoint a new surgeon general. Leaders who understand the import of books, the challenge that books provide to us in a very constructive way. And then I'm not afraid to use the legal powers of the state, by the governor's office, to see where legal challenges are appropriate in the court of law. This governor won't do it. He trusts his attorney general to do it. I think we should use the governor's office in the court to challenge the wrong direction of the state. Here's one thing I won't do, because I think too many Republican leaders do it. I'm not going to break the law. I'm not going to violate. I'm not going to do it. That's a tool of my Republican colleagues. I'm not going to do that, but within our means, we're going to reach to return the books, let teachers teach, and let our libraries open up.
If you would like to move over here, we'll also be taking some questions from online, so go ahead with the first question, please.
Testing. Hi, David. My name's Cheryl. I'm originally from New York. I've watched you many years on Collier and John Collier. So I'm going to try to be focused and articulate because I'm so outraged, disgusted, and scared. I agree with probably 90% of what you have said. Please don't listen to the consultants. Just put up with that. But he's breaking the law every single day, and I'm watching in real time how our democracy is just been burned to the ground. And how are the Democrats, the powers that be, going to ensure that we have free and fair elections? I don't think we will. Because he's laying the ground now. He's having military armories, all the Democratic cities, and he could declare martial law tomorrow, and that's it for elections. So that's my biggest fear. I know we could win on the issues.
Yeah.
That's not the problem. So
so the question was the challenge to democracy that is before our eyes every day, election integrity next November. Look, I just share this as a fellow citizen, and maybe this isn't what you would expect from a gubernatorial candidate. I share your worry that it's gonna slip away from us before we get there. I do, I do. We do have military in the street. We do have an assault on the constitutional norms. We do have political prosecutions. And look, I don't want to just, let's keep this on principles and values. I know some of my Republican friends will say, but in the last administration. I disagree with that, but I think what we can all agree on is we shouldn't have political prosecutions. So whatever that value set is, let's agree we shouldn't have political prosecutions. Let's recognize that the National Guard is typically mobilized with the permission of a governor, that that's not overrun. Let's recognize that whether it's ICE or another federal agency, the fundamental part of law enforcement is individual due process, and that's being violated. But we're losing sight of this right now. And so where I give a lot of credit is to our blue state governors. I really think they're fine. I'm a rule follower, but I will tell you that I think what Gavin Newsom did with redistricting is exactly what should be done. The balance is too important, and what Gavin Newsom did is the most responsible thing of all. He said, we're gonna redistrict for the next 4 years, but when the 2030 redistricting happens or census happens, we'll revisit this. There's an expiration date. So what Newsom did, but the other red state governors didn't. Here's what I will tell you about this race and what we do as a people. First, trust your local supervisors of elections.
Yeah.
They're really good. They are really good. Where we see the manipulation of elections, it happens way above a local supervisor of elections. It happens in the political spaces where elections are certified or not. So trust and work with your local supervisor of election, be an election monitor, whatever the local program in Collier County is. Secondly, our litigation groups are actually making progress. We're not winning at all, but the litigation groups are actually slowing down the assault in the court of law. So if that makes sense to you, consider being a part of that, supporting that. What is within reach in this cycle, and this is not a pipe dream, I promise you, because it is part of my motivating factors in this race. We have to win by more. We have to win by a lot more. When we win by 4 or 6, they can't take it away. If we win by 400 or 600 votes, they're going to steal it in a heartbeat. And so what do? Trust the local supervisors, invest in or be a part of the litigation groups that are actually fighting for democracy, and then get out there and hustle so we win by more. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I gave him, my name's Michael. I'm gonna ask something you never talked about today.
Sure.
I came to Florida in 1999 as a physician. 13 million Floridians at that time, Masameno. Now we have 22 million Masameno, but we haven't had enough physicians. And I can tell you here in Naples, which is the ground zero for concierge medicine, it takes about $600 million to get public medical school underway. Where did we put $600 million? Alcatraz. Yeah, wasn't that smart? And we're giving tax cuts. But wasn't that smart too? Basically, and we are getting more medical schools, but they are private for profit. And there's one private for profit that's probably coming here to Naples instead of a public school up at FGC Group. So, and basically, will you support the founding and funding of enough medical schools and dental schools and nursing schools, and will you get the state of Florida to accept Medicaid from the federal government? It's been mean-spirited and ugly, and it never should have happened in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Florida is going to adjust 1,000% budgets or values. You can look at an annual budget in the state of Florida. You can look at our long-term priorities and identify where the values are. Look, we need to expand Medicaid in the state of Florida. We're one of only 10 states in the country that hasn't. It improves health outcomes of individuals and families, and it's a net economic return to our state. This was a fight that was started because Rick Scott didn't like Barack Obama. We should expand Medicaid in the state of Florida. I also think we should fight for the ACA tax subsidies that allow more Florida's families to afford healthcare. And yes, let's appoint people to the same university system that drive an education and a post-secondary environment that keeps talent here in the state of Florida. You know, one little nuance of this is interesting. Some of you may be familiar, I know you're familiar, but with the economic models behind UVA and UNC, maybe you try to go there, your kids or grandkids try to go there. UNC and UVA, it is really hard to get into as an out-of-state student. University of Florida is actually really hard to get into as an in-state student. Think about that. It's an economic model we've decided to pursue. Now, I don't know the best balance. I don't. Right? We want bright minds internationally and nationally to come to the state of Florida. But I know if we're giving the brightest minds in Florida a reason to leave, then we're failing them and we're failing our state. And then here's the last piece on the discretionary budget items, because here's a broad esoteric worry I have at a time when Washington and Tallahassee has been attacking government and government services. I think we're going to face a real revenue and service environment in Florida in the next 10 to 20 years, where when we see the drawdown of federal services, does the state have to step in? Right? So storm response, FEMA. Are we actually going to have sufficient resources in the state to respond to storms? With healthcare, where we might have rural healthcare deserts in the state of Florida for the first time in decades. Do we actually have to find funding to provide a delta in the reimbursement rate to physicians to allow them to keep practicing in some communities because the federal reimbursement rate is so low? There are a lot of places where, look, we get what we pay for. We get what we pay for. And this debate coming from Doge and Blaze and others in Tallahassee leadership is all about how do we spend less. God bless them, that's great, let's spend less. But if we're leaving families behind when it comes to healthcare and education, the ability to afford a home, I do think that's where public policy meets private economies. And I worry, I think we're going to have a statewide conversation over the coming decades. Are we a state that's going to commit to providing basic essential services, providing for education and a workforce that keeps people here or not? Because the trend line is very obvious in that direction. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Kathy, and I'm an Episcopal priest and part of an interfaith group that has been holding privileges at Alcatraz. I just call it. Since the 1st of August, I've been out 4 times myself, and so I'm asking you, will you please shut it down?
People and offer fidelity and honesty and run for office. Look, I've been out of politics long enough to tell the truth. So, there's a lot of things that can't be done on day one. Let me tell you what can be done on day one. Alligator Alcatraz was started because Ron DeSantis issued an emergency declaration seizing the land from Miami-Dade County. As the next governor, I get to rescind that emergency order and say the state. I made my view of immigration very clear, but I want to give you that we're all going to go to school here for a minute because I want you to really think about this. Some things are policy and some things aren't. Some things are just a question of who are we as a people. We all know, we all learned the words of Emma Lazarus's sonnet. I think The Great Colossus is the name of it. It's affixed to the Statue of Liberty. So in the maybe 1890s, don't take me to school, teachers, I apologize for this. But the Supreme Court decided that immigration was a matter of national policy, not state, right? We couldn't have all the individual states determining their own immigration policy. We are aware, even since that decision, of the darker chapters of immigration. Emma Lazarus was asked to write the sonnet to put on the Statue of Liberty, and initially she said no. She said no, but she was convinced to do it. And so she wrote the sonnet that all of us learn, and we can repeat today together one line. We can repeat one line together. That one line is, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to be free. So we don't remember the line before. And so we're going to go to school. The lines before say, keep, actually, it starts by saying, unlike ancient lands with their Greek gods. But the lines immediately that precede this say, keep, oh, distant lands. That means old world countries, keep your storied pop. Keep your rich, your famous, your fabulous, were the words. Bring me, you're tired, you're poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. You ready for what comes next? You're homeless, you're homeless. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Behold, I lift my land by the golden doors. That's not policy, that's values. That's who we are. It is okay to be a party and to be a state that recognizes border security is important, but we don't need golden visas. We need to welcome the refugee. We need to welcome the. With no opportunity in life, that's who we are. This country has given all of us opportunity because we recognize that we're going to welcome people who are willing to abide by the laws we have, by the economy we have, and to pursue their own opportunities. That includes the person with nothing left on their back. That includes the person fleeing persecution, fleeing politics, fleeing crime, whatever it is. We don't have to back away from that. It's not right versus wrong or right versus left, it's right versus wrong. It's not left versus right, it's not policy. We just have to decide as people who we are. And I don't think we should be defensive about that. Now, it's okay to say, yes, we're going to have border security. We should support it. But who are we? If we say you're welcome here if you have $5 million, but if you're not welcome here, just don't have $5. That's a different.
Hear from the Zoom. This is from Lynn. DeSantis has directed state colleges and universities to name a road after Charlie Kirk. As we have the separation of church and state and our money funds schools, this should not happen. How can we stop this and do you agree?
So this starts with the corruption of our state university system, and we have to undo that and inform people who understand academia and leadership and how to grow institutions, not how to name roads. I will say at a moment of deep, deep national division around this issue that I try to understand, but it's not a community that I have been a part of, and so I'm missing some of the finer points of this. But I will tell you what I finally arrived at is that for my friends on the other side of the aisle who wish to honor the legacy of Charlie Kirk, we should all join with them in condemning violence. And we should join with them in condemning hate. And we should ask that everybody recognize that words hurt. And if you're an African-American woman who has heard words that say you are intellectually less qualified and insufficient compared to your peers, those words hurt. If you're a member of any faith but the Christian faith and you're told that your faith is insufficient and you should be marginalized, those words hurt. And rather than rush to pursue memorials, in the view of so many on the right, if you wish to honor Charlie Kirk's legacy, you should welcome in voices of dissent into the public square and give them the freedom of safety and security in speech that is currently being attributed to his legacy. And that's probably the greatest testament they can provide now.
Thank you for coming. I am actually 14 months younger, so.
Congratulations. So it's good today. Congratulations on making it.
Thank you. Anyway, so I come from a universe where, sorry to be I come from a universe where everything is marketing. What candidates the parties pick is marketing. Every single person you meet is marketing, okay? The Democrats are the worst marketing organization on the face of the earth. Whoever thought bringing Liz Cheney to anything other than to wave at people is a complete moron. I'm sorry. She had no business being anywhere near a microphone. I don't know who she brought into the party or anything. So, and the Democrats are so bad at marketing that they can give people $1 million and have people complain about what to tax them. So my question for you is, on the marketing component, on the candidate component, why are you not saying the term price?
Oh, oh, oh. So.
And by the way, and I say this in the context of the policies that Charlie espoused in 2022. Things that you said, great, I agree with. Your aspirational Reagan thing, we can talk about that later, but you can see plan to see what we have now. Go look up the time doctrine. So anyway, but yeah.
So I love this question. The fundamental question was branding and marketing is how people consume politics, which I 1000% agree with. The question was, how are you different than Charlie Crist? So we're
In a
gonna.
lot of ways.
Yeah, no, this is one of the more important conversations we're gonna have. I'm gonna tell you before you leave, let's exchange information. Because I want your help. I'm gonna say a couple different things. Did not slide toward you. I had this conversation for 4 months. Nobody ever asked me how I'm different than Valdemius. Nobody asked me how I'm different than the CFO nominee, Adam Hattersley, in 2022. Charlie lost by 18, Val lost by 16, Adam lost by 20. Democrats got wiped out, running on a Democratic platform that didn't meet the moment. It is reflexive to look at a 52-year-old white guy with salt and pepper hair, a former Republican, and say he's just like Charlie Crist. Val Demings had twice the amount of money and lost by the same margin. I don't get asked that question. I say that not to be, I'm not trying to be poignant or angry. I'm trying to say that to let us think about conventional wisdom in this race and why it's wrong. Every candidate is different. Charlie spent 10 years respectfully trying to convince the people of Florida that he hadn't changed. That was his whole shtick. I didn't leave the party left me. I test a different theory in politics. I've changed. On guns, I talk about gun violence right now in the way I did not in 2013 when I got to Congress. I was never an NRA guy, but I was generally a right of center Bush 41 Republican, admiring that Bush 41 resigned the NRA, but generally taking the approach of the Second Amendment. On reproductive freedom, I was applying my faith teachings in 2013 to a constitutional question, and I got it wrong. And as I served, I realized I was getting it wrong. And I became the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. When Republicans tried to rescind $400 million from Planned Parenthood, I tried to move it to community health centers to continue care in underserved communities. I was changing, I was growing. I was growing. I was always there with marriage equality and climate science. I wasn't there with campaign finance reform. I grew up thinking money is speech. And then I started serving and I realized that we had the most corrupt campaign finance system in the entire world. Finance the campaign. So Charlie tried to convince us he had to change. I tried to convince everyone that my change is authentic. And I test a different question in politics. Is it okay to change your mind? I actually think it is. I think it is.
Yeah.
And so the last thing I'll tell you, because I talked about earlier how we win, and I want you to leave convinced that we can win. I would not be chasing a generic environment where Democrats couldn't win. Our kids are 6 and 4. I would tell you in the 24 race, I don't think a Democratic candidate for president could have won. It's just my analyst hat. That doesn't mean we didn't leave it all on the field and we worked our tails off. But in a post-COVID economy where in Western democracies incumbents got their clocks clean, I'm not sure there's a pathway for Democrats to win in 24 for the White House. In 22, what we know following that cycle, there was no Democrat winning statewide because Charlie and Val and Adam all got their clocks cleaned. This cycle is different. Voters, not Democrats, voters are turning now saying we want change. We're outperforming for Democrats by 15 or 16 points. So it is to acknowledge that every environment is different. And so the Charlie question is a little bit insufficient in terms of the conventional wisdom because 22 is not 26. But surely I'm a different candidate than Charlie and Val and Adam.
And by the way, I'm 25 years old. But you look a lot better than me. You won't believe it, but I'm still a high school teacher. And teach as a title.
Wow. A 77-year-old high school teacher.
And I trained 14 years, and I recommend everybody read. And the number 2 is saving our schools, which I'm very interested in. And I just want to know, can I go back to the union and my colleagues and say that you will raise teacher salaries
Yes.
by 30%?
By 30%. So again, I don't want to be the politician that promises and doesn't deliver. What I'm promising you is on day one, we're gonna fight and I actually have a plan.
Yes.
I really do think, and so tourist development taxes are a little out there for most people who just consume politics based on who's running. But let me tell you how it works in the state of Florida. We bring in tons of money from people who come to our hotels and to Disney World and rent cars. We currently restrict how that money can be used. It can only be used to invest in more tourism in the state of Florida, or to advertise, in some cases, using 40% of that budget to advertise tourism outside of the state of Florida. So if you're riding the Chicago L in January, you want to be able to see an Allegiant Airlines advertisement of the beaches down here. But I will tell you, as an art director, a museum director, an administrator in Miami told me, she has to spend 70% of her budget, a very small museum, advertising in the newspapers across the country to people who are never going to come here to see that little art museum. It is intuitive, right? Tourism development dollars, we want to reinvest in more tourism. It's intuitive. Now, I'm not going to attack the tourism industry, as I told you, but. What if we take $2 of that rental car tax and $5 of that hotel tax and say, for the next 10 years, we're going to dedicate that revenue stream to public education? Every county initiative, this has happened, I think 6 initiatives maybe across the state in 2024. Voters voted to tax themselves more through a millage or a sales tax to fund public education. If they knew it went to teacher salaries and hardening against gun violence. Imagine if we asked Florida voters for the next 10 years, would you like the family from Michigan to give us an extra $5 to fund educating our kids? I think it'll pass with 80% of the state. So yes, we are going to commit to raising teacher salary. And we're going to commit to investing that in hardened infrastructure and in platforms of learning that look like the next century, not the last century.
This is more of a campaign question than a policy question.
The young people are in the room?
Yes,
Oh, no.
how, do you have a plan to reach out to them and bring them in?
This comes up, thank you for the question. This comes up in every room. I mean, as I mentioned when I got up, it wasn't a pejorative, it was a fact. I think I'm the youngest person maybe in the room. We're losing our kids in terms of community and youth involvement. And there are other groups we're losing as well. The immigrant community in South Florida is running toward our Republican friends because we simply have failed to address their greatest concerns. For our immigrant communities, we wrongly think that their number one issue is immigration. It's not. It's access to healthcare, access to housing, how they educate their kids. And frankly, within our immigrant communities, a lot of them like tough border security. So I will tell you when it comes to youth, a couple of things. I believe with conviction that we represent a set of values that our youth voters will embrace. Particularly on the last value. Well, the first one, the economy working for everyone. The second one on when it comes to education, student loans and others. But the third value, a place where everyone's welcome. I think that's a value where people can see, the young people can see themselves in this coalition. We're going to get to process and strategies here in a minute, but I want to tell you about a conversation I had yesterday in Charlotte County.
Yeah, Fort Myers.
Fort Myers. I'm looking at our team, it's been a whirlwind. Nearby. We met afterwards with 10 or 12 voters, as young voters. And it was I promise you I'm going to carry this conversation through next November. Because it was interesting to ask the questions, trying to draw kind of the authentic responses, not to lead them. Yeah, there were maybe 30% of that group who said they don't think Florida's gonna be a home for them. At a young age, they were thinking about that. What really, really informs me is probably universal response, and I spent a lot of time on this, about gun violence. About gun violence. Each of them had an experience in school. Some of them had mentioned their own experience in a lockdown situation or a moment of gun violence in the school. But what was most fascinating, it was as they all finished speaking about it, I asked them, who do you blame? Who do you blame? And it was all of us. It was adults. Adults have let them down. They didn't see it through, I don't believe, I don't believe they saw it through a Republican or Democratic lens. These were young people who had chosen to identify as, I guess, all Democrats. They were at a Democratic event like this. But they had this generational resentment that their adults had let them down and exposed them to gun violence. So then the question becomes, if we're right on the values, and we can respond to their concerns, how do we reach them? I often say, I'm not cool. I'm not gonna be cool. Putting me on TikTok's not gonna make me cool. It's gonna make me awkward. But we've got to figure out a way to spend time with them and bring them in so that they can see themselves in this coalition. One of the things I'm trying to do, and I've been saying it publicly for so long now, I've got to deliver. But what I want to do, even on our social media platforms where most kids consume information, I want it to become their universes, not mine. So rather than asking them to come into our political universe, why don't we go into theirs? So can I identify 5, 10, 15 young people who live online, whether they have 5 followers or friends or 50,000, and each week commit time to their universe, where young people start to see this campaign through their lens, not through mine. We've got to figure out how to do that, but I actually think enough people have gotten it wrong and have overlooked it, that there's a great opportunity there. And the last thing I say to young people, incredibly respectfully, and I say this to people of other communities around the state, and it's why I said earlier, make me stronger, make me smarter. Where I fail, where I'm insufficient, help me. Help me. I really mean that. Help me be a stronger candidate. Help me learn. I speak from my lived experience. But at some point also, we have to ask others that if we're crossing the bridge halfway to them, they got to cross the bridge towards us. We do have to ask young people in other communities to do their part as well. And to help us and to meet us halfway. I think we have a great opportunity because change environments have people like the 10 kids yesterday in Fort Myers saying, I gotta do my part, I gotta do something. It was as encouraging as it was dispiriting. The heartbreak around gun violence and some of the other issues. Frankly, a young queer woman who said she's gonna move to Ireland. That was her lived experience. And I even asked her, I said, do you think a governor, do you think one election can fix that? And her hope was maybe reticent, but maybe what she sees in this campaign and the opportunity for change is that we're pushing harder towards justice and towards equity. We're pushing harder towards reducing gun violence. They see a reason to be a part of this. It's not easy and it's not going to be done tomorrow, but I think over the next 13 months, we can turn enough young voters out that have skipped past us. That's right.
I really have kind of a two-part fairly quick question. I've been in Florida for 24 years, and I think it's safe to say that I have a lot of Republican friends. Hopefully I do. How are you going to reach Republicans? This is an easy audience. So how are you going to reach Republicans, number one, and number two? We've seen over working with the Democratic Party here, the difficulty in Republican candidates being willing to enter into any debates.
Yeah.
Is Myron Donald going to enter into debates?
Here's what's gonna happen in this race. I've got my consultant hat on, not my candidate hat on. We have already moved the polls and this race is a toss-up. This race is a toss-up right now. Our polls, we're out. What I have said to people across the country and across the state, I'm gonna do what Lawton Childs did in 1970. We're gonna go everywhere, absolutely everywhere. deep red communities, frankly, like Naples. I don't, as we were having a conversation yesterday, I don't look at voter registrations when I go in the community, I just go. So we're going to go everywhere and close the polls, and what's going to happen is Byron Donalds, or whomever they choose to nominate on their side, we'll see, is going to have to stand up and have a conversation with voters that he has thought he won't have to have. And the way we do that is frankly, that when I speak about values, I do think that's big enough to tether together independents and Republicans, but we also have to have some strategies. Look, I think Mayor Pete has given us a playbook in a lot of Democratic races. Because he's the first one to turn around and say to Republicans, what are you willing to do? I think we need a state cap fund for insurance. Republicans will call it socialism. So what's your plan? Can you convince enough people in Naples that you're gonna reduce their homeowners insurance? Byron, I don't think you can. Can you convince enough people that they're safe from school shootings? I don't think you can, Byron. So we have to be willing to go into conservative media environments, into conservative communities, and have conversations that not only express our values, but ask the other side to be held accountable for their view and for their vision. Here's where I will say this is real strategy. Chris and I were talking about this just last evening. I believe we have this race close to being able to have a general election conversation. So understand what Republicans did in this state to try to mute and make it harder for Democrats to win. They passed a whole plethora of pro-incumbent electoral reform challenges. One of them is that we have a primary, I think the third week in August. Mail ballots for November hit like 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
Understand, Republicans did that by design. Because they want the party out of power to have the toughest time possible. So what I've said to my Democratic friends, and the reason I beg you to help me make me stronger where I'm insufficient, do it, but consider being a part of this coalition, is we have to unify now. We have to unify now, even if we have a primary in the gubernatorial race, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. But we've got to make sure we don't have a circular firing squad between now and next August. We have to remember that our race, our challenge is to contrast ourselves with Republicans. But I think we are already getting into an environment, and I say this as an analyst, where we are ready to go into a general election environment and have the same exact conversation we're having right now. Understand what I believe we can do. I did not give you a Democratic talk today. I will give the same talk and do these same questions with Republicans and independents. Because I think our values are impenetrable. How can you help? How can you be a part of this? In communities across the state of Florida, it becomes easy for us to go into events organized by a local Democratic Party, a local indivisible party, a group adjacent to the Democratic Party. Let's keep doing that. If we don't turn out our party and our base, we lose. When I talk about amplifying our values, it means doubling down on our values, turning out our party. But where any of you in this room are able to say, we didn't pay the utility bill. Where any of you are able to say we have a homeowners association, we have a civic club. I spoke to the Sarasota Economic Club 2 weeks ago, and I promise you 90% of that room were Republicans. I'm gonna do the Miami Economic Club, Miami-Dade Economic Club in a few weeks, same environment. But we have to start now. Not next September, not next Labor Day, saying, oh, by the way, communities that we haven't spoken to, now let's introduce ourselves. So I say that because this is how you can help. Truly, this is how you can help. If you have access to the opportunity to create a civic community environment for us to have a conversation, even if it leaves red, great, let's do it. Let's do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Denise. I've been a fellow Democrat. I have two quick questions. How do you believe you can bring about or try to change the policy regarding the 287G agreement affecting alligator Alcatraz? And also, how do you feel about policy and what are your thoughts on the LGBTQ plus trans?
Let's take the second question first, LGBTQ plus, and then the first question was, sorry, I just have alligator Alcatraz, so you have to have 287G, the ICE agreements. Look, I've been an ally of the LGBTQ plus community as a matter of constitutional principle, and even as a Republican, call it a libertarian trend. As a Republican in 2013, I supported marriage equality. There were only three of us in Congress at the time, Ileana Clayton, myself, I believe Fred Upton from Michigan. I've been an ally and advocate since, and I will say on the trans community, look, this is an important conversation. We each have different lived experiences. My lived experience is, yes, I have family members who are LGBTQ, but I don't have a family member who is trans. And so it's not a lived experience. One of the members of the Biden family once told me, Joe Biden's the last person at his age from his upbringing to tell you that he fully understands the trans community, but he's the first person to tell you he understands standing up for everybody, protecting the rights of everybody, and punching the bully in the face. So it may not be my lived experience, but I'm going to tell you a story that really informed my advocacy and alliance for specifically the trans community. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. Makes me stubborn or cheap or both. I was on top of our pool screen one day, doing our pools. I shouldn't have been up there, and I shouldn't have been up there with my cell phone, but I was. And someone called that I had not heard from in 15 years. I wasn't that close with them, and it was an odd call. So sitting up on the pool screen, I took this call and spoke to this man for 30 minutes. And he said, I'm calling you because I have a trans grandchild. And I'm telling you, I don't fully understand it, but what I know is that our grandchild went through suicidal ideations. We got them counseling. We did everything we could. We finally got them into a healthcare environment that was right for the youth. And where this child had suicidal ideations and felt ostracized and was trying to run away, this child now is set to be the valedictorian, surrounded by friends in the band marching. But if Tallahassee passes the legislation they ultimately pass, our doctor would be arrested for continuing the care, and the child would be removed from the parent's home if the parents allow it. I don't have to understand that entire lived experience of the youth to understand the experience of that family, and to know that the law was disrupting a young person's life and opportunity, and it made them feel unwelcomed and marginalized and punched at. And so this grandfather said to me, my opportunity as a grandfather is I will bring the healthcare in from out of state and risk going to jail myself if that means preventing my child from having to move to Illinois and go through this process of counseling and suicidal and runaways again. He said, I'm just calling you because I want anybody with a voice to be able to understand what it means to be a part of the trans community and a family with someone who's trans. I went on Nicole Wallace and shared that story. 20 minutes later, told the whole story. I don't think look, I introduced myself as a person of deep faith. The trans community is not part of our family experience. As I mentioned, the LGBT community is. But I know we have to fight for the dignity and respect and constitutional rights of everybody, and we have to ensure that our youth are growing up in an environment where they feel safe and respected and have the care they need. We shouldn't shy away from that. On the 287G agreements, the ICE agreements, here's what I will tell you the fail point is in these agreements. They don't guarantee and ensure individual due process. They don't. And what I want to see from Florida's municipal leaders, whether it's from Orlando or Orange County or Miami-Dade or Jacksonville or any small community, stand up and say, we will only sign this if you amend it to include that we're going to protect the individual due process of people who are being apprehended. Even our Democratic municipal leaders aren't doing that right now. Create a test case that goes all the way to the Supreme Court to say if local law enforcement is going to participate with ICE, that we want to ensure that individual due process is protected. Right now, if you talk to local law enforcement leaders, some of them will tell you, we signed it because we fear what happens if we don't. But we are only going to ensure that the perimeter environment of a community is secure. We're not going to engage in going in and doing the apprehension. We'll provide transport. And if we take the individual to the station, we will hold them for 1 hour until the feds come to pick them up. But we're not going to continue to confine them because we believe it's a violation of their due process. Where are our Democratic leaders standing up and saying, we don't want to sign these agreements and I'm willing to lose my job. I'm willing to lose my job. You know, one of the conversations we sometimes have in Democratic politics, people look at Jolly and say, is he a good enough Democrat? Guess what? I put my job on the line as a Republican to stand up to Donald Trump. I did it. I'll do it as a Democrat, and we need more Democratic leaders willing to do their job to stand up to this administration.
David, I'm a teacher of art, and let me say that it truly was a joy this afternoon, listening to you speak and hear about you guys. It was a joy not to feel alone. To be in this village. People I know that have the same values, so what I wish for all of you, three things: find joy in your life, find value, and find meaning in what you do day in and day out. But I have a particular question for you, because it's not a political question, it's not a philosophical question, it's not a campaign question, but I've often heard you speak on MSNBC, and you learn a lot about the people who speak by the background behind it. I want to know, are you the artist? Is it your wife? I've ever seen, so,
Okay, so a little bit of inside home here, and then I'll close. The two questions I get about MSNBC, this is absolutely true. The first question is Nicole Wallace as nice as she's? Absolutely, yes. She is my ride or die, one of my besties, and what you see and what you get, she's incredible. The second is, what's that art behind you? I never studied art as a kid. I never grew up around art, but during COVID, I started studying it. They're all Monet reproductions. They're not the ones you typically see, right? It'd be easy to do all the water lilies and others. These are the deep archives of Monet, because it's just part of my journey learning art, which I'll also tell you, one of the things I want to do when we get elected governor is bring back art to the state of Florida. Well, I want to open the governor's mansion through loan agreements with major art installations, bring back the art that lets us see who we are, who we could be, who we've been. That's the boundary, bring back culture and theater, and open it up to the people of Florida, open it up to school kids and everyone else. Otherwise, who else wants to go to Tallahassee? But they're all Monet reproductions. The other third secret I'll give you is it is such a hard task to try to build a home studio for TV. It is not the words you say, it is not the microphone, it is the lighting.
Yeah.
And so those white frames with watercolors are perfect. Minutes, and then we'll hand it over and close this thing out. I'm gonna ask you to do something. I ask this in every room that I've been. I mean it, I mean it, I mean it. If you can help us, great. Give us volunteer. Chris Wills is setting up 67 counties and leadership committees. Be a part of that to help us distribute material, communications, information, or swag, whatever it is. If you can contribute to the race, please do so. That's great. If you can't, that's fine as well. Just spread the word. But I'm gonna actually do something very important. I started this race 4 months ago saying the same thing. Today is our 81st community event in the state of Florida. And I asked you to do something that I asked in my very first one. Believe. Believe. Take that for a moment. Believe. My wife and I would not be in this race. I pledge to you. If we did not believe that in this moment, we've got the best shot we've had in 30 years to change the direction of the state, that when we change the direction of Florida, we impact national politics. We give people across the country the opportunity to look to something that's different and that's better. Believe, leave here believing. And the best news of all, I know this, you already do. You already do. You already do. Whatever's on TV right now, or you would be Googling. Or you would be home Googling Portugal, but you're not.